Welcome to the Teach Joyfully podcast, where we talk about all things elementary teaching with some mom stuff thrown in. I'm Lisa Burns, a teacher success coach, veteran elementary teacher, and mom of 5. I'll be your host. Thanks for joining me today. So I have a couple of questions for you today, my teacher friends. Do your students struggle with engagement in reading? Do you have some students you just can't seem to get excited about books? Well, here's one way that you can help create some buzz and excitement around reading and books. I'm all about students learning to read and loving reading, loving books and being engaged with them. Becoming a reader and learning to love reading doesn't happen on a timeline. It isn't something that you can predict when a student will become a reader. And when I say reader, I don't just mean knowing how to read. I mean in a committed relationship with books, as in I love to read and I love books. That is something we all strive for all of our students, but it isn't always as easy as we think it's going to be. So today I'd like to give you another tool in your toolbox for creating excitement and engagement around reading. So let's talk author studies. When I know way back when I first started thinking about doing author studies, all I could think of was, ugh, how much work is this going to be? Was that your first thought? I'll bet it was. Well, guess what? But the reality is they don't have to be more work. They're much easier to incorporate into your literacy program than you think. And they really aren't just one more thing to do. They can become an integral part of your actual teaching. So here we go. Let's dive in. So let's start with what is and what isn't an author study. An author study is a deep dive into an author's life and work. Now, obviously, how deep you go is entirely up to you, and it also depends on how often you're planning on doing author studies. If you're going to do author studies on a regular basis, you're not going to go super deep into each one. If you're only going to do a couple a year, then you might go deeper than someone who's doing them all the time. But let me tell you, an author study is not a project. It's not. If you're making an author study a project for your students to do and then present to the class, you've missed the boat. An author study is an opportunity to learn about and engage with an author so that we will enjoy their books more. That makes reading more fun and more enjoyable. That's the point of an author study. It is not a project. If you're doing projects for author studies, you are killing that love of reading, not growing it. So get rid of the project and let's really dive deep into just enjoying who these authors are. So why do an author study? Well, understanding an author better can help us understand their books better. It's pretty hard to write a book without having anything hint back to who you are and the frame of your work or the topics that you choose. Authors do this knowingly or unknowingly, and children's authors draw on their own childhood extensively in writing books for children. So other than learning more about the author, why else would you do an author study? Well, an author study can create a community of readers. It helps bond you together. Any shared experience around something like this can bond your class and create a class community. It also expresses your values that we are readers in this classroom. You're creating a literary environment by studying authors. It's pretty hard to not feel like you're a reader when you're learning more about the authors that you read. Author studies are also an opportunity to introduce students to lots of books and genres that they may or may not choose themselves. This also helps students learn what they like and what they don't like. How many times have you had a student who has no idea what they like to read? By introducing them to authors and a whole host of their books, they can learn more about themselves as readers as well. It builds curiosity about the books and about the author. Learning to be curious about who wrote the book is not always a given for students. A lot of times students just kind of blip over the author, even though you may mention that every time before you start reading a book. They kind of blip over that and they don't really pay that much attention. By focusing in on the author, it helps students learn to be curious about authors and pay more attention to the fact that every book has an author. This helps in their writing and it helps in their reading because it builds that sense of curiosity, which can carry over to the actual book itself. In addition, They help students connect personally with authors and books. We're built for connection. That's who we are as human beings. It's how we're created. We want personal connections, and this becomes a bit of a personal connection with the author, which can make us more curious and more committed to reading this author's books. By knowing more about an author, it can also help us make connections in the book to our real lives, to the author's life. There's all kinds of ways that connections can be built if we know more about the author and where they come from. It helps your students learn to ask questions in a natural setting. Once you start giving your students a little bit of information about an author, they're going to have questions. You know they will, especially if you can find something really interesting about an author or draw some parallels to the topics they're choosing or the themes they're choosing in their books to their own lives. Author studies can help us learn how to compare and contrast. We can compare and contrast different books that the same author has written, compare and contrast their lives to our own lives, all kinds of ways to make comparisons. We can make inferences. We can make inferences about the books and events in the books based on the author's life. We can make inferences about all kinds of things if we know more about the author. We can make inferences about why they chose certain topics because we know more about the author. These are natural ways to incorporate some good comprehension skills within an author study. We can find themes and topics between the books that are similar or even different. Why did the author choose similar topics? Why did they choose different topics? Is there a similar theme throughout all of their books, or are there different themes? There's lots of ways even very young children can dig into these. Not to mention that your students will learn to develop their own opinions about authors and their books as they start digging deeper. Even young children will have strong opinions about the books they like and don't like. Just because you love most of the books one author writes doesn't mean you're going to love them all. What opinions do your students have about all of these books? What opinions do they have about the author's life? And then, as always, it's the perfect opportunity to use evidence. I am all about students learning to use evidence to support their answers, even in the primary grades. There is no reason for all students to not be able to use evidence. It is such a simple thing to do. It really is something that will help them dig deeper and remember and connect more with the book and comprehend what they're reading better. Evidence applies to every single area of an author's study. As we're finding connections, making inferences, looking for themes and topics, always at the center of that is what evidence do you have to support that. I could go on and on about the benefits of author studies. And while there's lots of other reasons, I'm going to give you one last reason for why you should be doing author studies. You can help students learn to compare and contrast. You can compare and contrast settings, characters, and so much more within an author's work. There's something about comparing and contrasting a single author's books against each other, finding similarities and differences between the kind of characters they choose to make and the settings that they choose that really tends to hit home with students. And you might be surprised at some of the things that your students will find in the books as they compare and contrast them. Even in very simple books, you will find surprises that you might not have found before if you weren't busy comparing and contrasting the same author's works. For example, in the board book Goodnight Gorilla by Peggy Rathman, she has characters that make cameos from some of her other books. So if you've read 10 Minutes to Bedtime, you might find some of those characters in Goodnight Gorilla, and vice versa. This can happen with other authors as well. You will be surprised by the things your students will figure out that maybe you never even noticed, no matter how many times you've read those books. So how do we do an author study? Well, first of all, you have to choose an author, don't you? And then you'll need to decide on how long you'll study that author. Will you study that author for a week? Will you study that author for 2 weeks? How much time do you have? How can you fit it in? I usually do an author study for 1 week. That means 5 books, 1 book a day. Not to say I don't have more of that author's books in the classroom. I do. Every book I can get a hold of, I have it ready to go. But I only actually read and introduce 5 of them. So once you've decided on the author and how long you'll study that author, then you need to gather books by the author. Now, I'm very realistic about teacher budgets. I get it. I was always that teacher early on who didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. I understand a teacher budget. There's lots of ways to get hold of books without having to buy them all. Check your school library if you have one. Go to the public library and order as many of the books in advance that you can. And you can check YouTube. There's lots of places like Storyline Online and just YouTube videos where you can find books that are done as read-alouds. You can probably find some of your author's books there as well. So be creative and see what you can find on one author without having to pay a dime. Also, don't forget to take a peek in that classroom library because you just never know what you might have in there. In addition, ask around. Some of the teachers in your building may have some of the books that you can borrow and then give back when you're done. After that, you need to read the books, wonder, talk, enjoy them every single day, compare and contrast them. There's so many skills that you can teach without really even trying. Be as natural with the books as you can. Yes, you're going to have some prompts ready to go if needed, some things, some targets you might want to hit, but you really want the conversation to flow and grow as you're reading the books. So yes, you're going to have a few targets, but you're also going to see where the conversations go and what the students find out. Because one of our main objectives with this is to grow readers. And by growing readers, their curiosity and their comprehension skills will come along through the conversations. But by growing readers and engaging them and helping them learn to engage and be excited by books, those conversations are going to get deeper and better along the way. Yes, you're going to have targets that you want to hit as far as what kind of comprehension skills that you're thinking of, but don't be stuck on that. Remember to be open to where conversations will go. Now, I said don't turn this into a project for your students, and I mean that. But that doesn't mean that you can't make charts, graphs, group the books, regroup the books, put them in piles, redo the piles. Those are ways that you can also help students engage the books. Students can group books in lots of different ways. They can group them by topic. They can group them by theme. They can group them by problems that were in the book. They can group them by types of characters. There's all kinds of ways that students can group and ungroup books. It's fun to let them actually figure that out. You can make a chart and keep track of things that happen or characters or specific things that you're trying to look for in the books. Your students can even lay the books out like a timeline for the author's writing. Which book did they write first? Check inside the book. Show students how to find the copyright and how to find the date when a book was published. Then go into what one came next and lay them out in a line showing how the progression happened. And from there, you can make all kinds of observations about their growth even as a writer and how their writing may have changed over time. If you want to make a chart after you read each book, you can document all kinds of things on a chart. Maybe you're studying characters, so you're going to document the main character in each book and then compare and contrast them at the end. Maybe you're talking about settings and you're going to document details about settings on your chart, and at the end you'll make comparisons about those particular items. And from there you can extend. You can do as much or as little as you want. It doesn't require a lot of prep work. You can write to the author as a class, see if you get a response. You can research more about the author. If your students are super excited about this author and want to know more, by all means, you can do some class research about the author. You can write to the author and ask for an interview. Or you can find an interview with them that's done online already. It helps to check on their publisher's page to see if there's anything readily available there first, and then you can just do a general search. Remember, you're going to begin your author study by simply introducing the text and reading it. Enjoy it. We all know what to do and don't do before we read a text or teach any lesson, for that matter, that impacts students' engagement. Go into your regular routine for introducing a book. Talk about the pictures, talk about the title, make predictions, all of those things. And then read, notice, wonder, be curious. Talk aloud, think aloud as you read. And as you read another one the next day and the day after that, let the fun begin. Start comparing, noticing similarities and differences, discuss things that have happened, and discuss as you go along. Just keep on going until you get to the end of your week or however long you're doing your author study. Now, when you do an author study, I guarantee that your students are want to grab those books up and have an opportunity to look at them and read them themselves. Here's the thing. You can't have every student grab hold of those books, can you? So create a little list, a wait list of sorts, if you will, and put a Post-it on each book so that every student can get a chance to read the book if they want. This is a great way to keep track, but it also makes students kind of excited because they can see that their name getting closer and closer to the top of that list. And who doesn't like to be at the front of the line? So a quick recap for you. Author studies are easier than you think. They really don't have to be difficult. You need a little basic information on an author, which is a quick search online, and you need books, lots and lots of books. So choose your author, decide how long your study will be, gather books by the author, write out a few prompts if you feel like you need them, and then get busy. Read, wonder, compare, discuss, and use all those fabulous comprehension skills, including using evidence to support your thinking along the way. I believe in the power of author studies so much that every month my members in the Literacy Success Lab get an author cheat sheet so that they can easily and quickly do an author study with their students. All they have to do is gather the books. All right, my friends, I have an author study cheat sheet for you. You can find it in the show notes with all the other links and resources mentioned in this episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. You can also grab that freebie at www.hopeineducation.com/vault. That link is in the show notes as well. So that's it, my teacher friends. We're out of time and I'm out of breath. Thanks so much for joining me today. I love hearing what my listeners think and what topics they want to hear more of. You can DM me on Instagram or send an email to teamhope@hopeineducation.com. If you liked today's episode, I'd love it if you'd go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen and leave a review. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button so you'll never miss an episode. Also, you can continue the conversation online with me in my Facebook group, the Teach Joyfully podcast community, where elementary teachers can connect, get help, and encouragement for all kinds of education and parenting topics. You can find the show notes and all the links to the resources mentioned in today's episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. And remember, a happy teacher is a good teacher. Until next time, teach joyfully and take care of you.